I got my MBA from Pepperdine University with a focus in finance, and I had always planned to kind of start my own company. I really fell into the oil industry and was really sought out and offered an internship. I thought oil was a tank underground. Turns out that's not the case. But I spent about 20 years in the industry, and I did a little bit of everything in that industry. And what I really found is I didn't fit there. I kept trying to change the industry, and I kept trying to disrupt the industry. And I thought, maybe this is just not the place for me. So I went and I started my own company, my own geothermal company. And I thought, well, if you give the workers who are in the oil and gas industry a place to go when we transition from fossil fuels to renewable, then we can transition faster. Because if you see coal workers been displaced, there are entire towns that have been built on oil and gas. There are tribal communities that rely on that for economic development. And so what I thought is if you could take the geothermal heat transfer idea, and being a chemical engineer by background, that seems so obvious to me, take the heat from the hot fluids that are produced. As it turns out, oil and gas companies pay for coolers. They run coolers on diesel generation. And I thought, well, why don't you just swap that out and put geothermal coolers in and then push clean power into the grid on the distribution side, or have energy produced cleanly. So it's a way to kind of start decarbonizing and transfer skill sets, give people a place to go and see how they can solve problems. It was a wonderful, amazing experience to be a co-founder and CEO of a company. I realized I didn't want to be a CEO of a company either. I'm not much of a capitalist, and I really didn't want to talk to finance bros all the time and tell them about my ideas and convince them of my ideas. I wanted to do the work in a community. And so when I left my company in 2022, I really took some time off because it's a lot of work to do that, but I really thought about what do I want to do with my energy experience and where can that best be served. The IRA had just been passed, and there's a lot of J40 initiative and thinking about just energy transition, and I really wanted to be back in community. My family comes from the village of Kayana in Alaska. My grandmother moved our family here to Denver, Colorado during the forced assimilation after World War II. So this was part of U.S. government genocide policies, forced assimilation policies, relocate from reservations to urban centers with the promise of jobs and homes. So they placed us in the projects in Commerce City where there's poisoned water and poisoned air and said, good luck out there. And I grew up very poor and went through foster care and went through family with drug abuse and alcohol abuse and homelessness, all the challenges that a lot of tribal communities deal with on a regular basis. And so I fell into that industry and really wanted to do something with that. And so I joined SunShare, and I picked SunShare specifically because of their ethos, the way that they show up with communities. It's really about driving policy that is for the best of everyone, really driving policy here in Colorado, Minnesota, and New Mexico to get the community solar market up and running. SunShare is the oldest community solar company in the nation. We actually started here in Colorado Springs, where the first garden was built. We really are one of those industry leaders. We really think about our best practices being ethical and at the highest of standards and doing more than what is necessary, especially when we go to build these infrastructure, build these projects. The most important thing is that we get the land, we develop the energy, and then we also construct it and we also manage it on the back end. So we do an end-to-end management, and that keeps us in contact with our gardens and our communities, and we really can invest in those communities and invest in our partners. And so, I fit very much. I'm very inquisitive. I love seeing results. I'm very transparent, so people have to tell me, don't say those things in public, so I don't mind sharing my information. And then I'm just an environmentalist at heart, and that's why I never fit in the oil industry. So, and of course, I'm happy to talk with anybody. Somebody's described it as kind of being a golden retriever, and I think that's probably accurate. So I wanted, for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with the grid and how it works, I really wanted to introduce this idea before I have Julie come up so that you know what we mean by community solar. She's going to talk about community solar subscriptions and how that works and how those of you in the audience can benefit from that. Before I do that, though, I really want to talk through kind of the standard grid for those of you who maybe don't understand this. So usually we generate power at the power plant. We have switched from coal plants to switch to natural gas, and the power goes from there and it gets stepped up in voltage so that you can send it on the big lines that go across state. And those are those big, it looks just like that shape, the really, really tall, big metal ones. And it goes on the transmission lines, and then it's going to be stepped down again to the neighborhood to be able to go into the distribution system. And that's where a community solar garden sits. It sits on the distribution side of the grid. And so it's a lot like solar on a rooftop, but it's in a community garden instead. It's smaller than what you see when utilities build those giant solar farms that are just hundreds of acres, right? These sit on like 25, 30, 40 acres for about 5 megawatts. So still takes up land, but you can combine agrivoltaics with it. And so this is a way to democratize energy and give more access to more people when it comes to energy. So community solar is just that. You build the garden, you push it into the grid, it gets redistributed out. It helps with the sustainability of power on the grid. So, I wish we could kind of geotag electrons as we generate them, but that's not possible. It's still magic to some extent when it comes to electricity. We're still figuring things out. And so where energy is generated and where it is used, the closer those are together, the more reliable the energy is. And so community solar kind of supports that reliability of the grid, and that's why it's an important part. So we're really kind of switching our grid from that centralized focus to more of a distributed focus. So that's really what community solar is and how it fits in. With that, I'm going to swap over in speakers so that my colleague Julie can get up here. She's on the subscriber side of the business. I'm on the developer side of the business. So I do all kind of the background work and then hand it to her to talk with everyone who wants to join in and participate in that.
I'm Julie Nelson. So I'm a solar consultant for Sunshare. I've worked for them for 3 years. So it's my job to educate folks on how our program works and help them get signed up. So one big picture thing about community solar in Colorado is that only the 2 investor-owned utilities are required to participate, Xcel and Black Hills. And so the only utilities who participate are those 2 in Colorado. Sunshare only happens to work with Xcel right now, but anyone in the whole state of Colorado who has an Xcel electric bill in their name is eligible to participate in our program. A little bit about Sunshare. We are local to Denver, and we do have a lot of relationships with local vendors for a gift card program as part of our financial incentive for signing up. We do always look for a property that isn't being used otherwise. Little chunks of land, usually on farmers' land. They're not using it for one reason or another. We're able to put it to good use. And when possible, we like to try to make dual use happen there. Right now, we're focusing on the area up and around Greeley to build our new gardens. And so what that looks like in northeast Colorado, as far as dual use agrivoltaics, is grazing sheep in and around the solar gardens. But what is exciting is that we do have a garden coming up in Minnesota soon. We're going to be able to plant some food crops in and around that. So that's going to be really cool. This is just some numbers on what the average environmental impact would look like for the average subscriber who signs up for the duration of the program. And different kind of metrics on what that would look like as far as saving. And some more numbers for Sunshare. We're closing in on 20,000 subscribers. And as Salina said, right now we're active in Colorado and Minnesota, have a whole slew of gardens in those 2 states. New Mexico's coming up soon, and with plans to move into other states in the near future. And a timeline, as Salina had mentioned, this whole thing, most people don't know, community solar began in Colorado in 2010. This is the place it was first dreamed up, and that legislation was passed here. It since has expanded to a lot of other states. Each state takes it up with its own legislation, but it began here, and SunShare was founded right after that in 2011 here in Colorado. So like she said, we're the oldest community solar company in the U.S. Another interesting point on this timeline, we were able to pass a Modernization Act in 2019. So originally the legislation had some really restrictive stipulation in there that required our subscribers to live in or adjacent to the county where their garden was located. Now most of our subscribers are in the Denver metro area. Our counties are really small and the land is really expensive. So we were able to get rid of that requirement. Now we can tie to Xcel's grid anywhere that they operate in Colorado, and we can find a substation and some good land. And anyone in the state in Colorado who gets their electricity from Xcel can participate in our program. Really open things up here in Colorado. And we just got that in Minnesota as well. So this coming year, that's no longer going to be the case for new gardens. So yeah, this is a simple graphic I show folks to just illustrate the concept. No equipment at the house, right? So we're building our solar gardens off somewhere else. And what happens is, if someone signs up with me, I put them on a wait list. So we do have wait lists. The folks signing up with me now will get onto a garden that's scheduled to go live in mid to late summer. What we also do when we sign them up is take a look at how many kilowatt hours a year of electricity they use at their house. We look at their last 12 bills, and that essentially tells us how many solar panels on one of our solar gardens we need to assign to their needs, so that over the course of a year, we're going to push the same amount of green energy onto Xcel's grid in their name as whatever they're pulling from the grid at their house. So we're offsetting 100% of their usage, and now Xcel doesn't have to make that brown energy, right, with coal or natural gas. So as far as the environment is concerned, just as good as rooftop solar. It's doing the same thing. More solar, less fossil fuel on the grid. And then once they do get active on a garden, this is what their billing will look like. We don't take over their bill. You're going to have two bills, one from SunShare. You're still going to get your Xcel bill. But now you're going to see a new section on your Xcel bill where Xcel calculates the credit they have to give you for the green energy that we put onto the grid for you that month. In this example for this customer, SunShare has put 550 kilowatt hours of green electricity on the grid for this person that month. And then the calculation is those kilowatt hours multiplied by Xcel's current bill credit rate. That's what it's called. So every year at the beginning of the year, Xcel gets to set that number with the approval of the PUC. So it's about 8.5 cents a kilowatt hour right now. It just changed. It was about 8.3 cents a kilowatt hour. So in this example, this person's getting $47 credit from Xcel off of their bill. What's cool too is a couple years ago, Xcel decided to include the gas bill in that. So if you ever found that your credit that month was more than your electric bill, now Xcel will take that extra credit and apply it to your gas bill. In Colorado, our bill credit rate is relatively low, so it's pretty rare to ever see that your credit from Xcel would exceed that total of your gas and electric. Real rare. But if it happens, it's not lost. Xcel keeps track of it for you on the bill, and you get to use it in subsequent months. So the takeaway is you never lose the credit you earn from Xcel, even if you don't use it in the month it was earned. Right? So they get 47 back from Xcel, and now look at your SunShare bill. It's the same equation. What you owe to SunShare is exactly the same as what Xcel just gave you off your bill. And that will always be the case. So every year, when Xcel changes their bill credit rate, SunShare's charge rate changes immediately to match it. So always your SunShare charge is going to equal what Xcel just gave you. It's a financial wash on your bills. It costs you nothing more than what you were going to pay anyway to Xcel to fully offset your fossil fuel electricity with clean energy. So that's a little much there, but I hope that makes sense to everybody. This slide I put together for a couple of reasons. The numbers in these two tables are exactly the same, the headers are different, just to drive home the fact that whatever Xcel gave you that month is exactly what SunShare is going to charge you. But the other thing this shows you is how your solar panels make energy month to month. So what's important to note is we're not matching your monthly usage, we're matching your yearly usage because of the way solar makes its energy. Solar panels make most of their energy in the summer. So this is for a homeowner who uses about 11,000 kilowatt hours of electricity in a year. So that's the bottom of the first column, the total. And you can see how that person's panels, they don't own the panels, but it's how that person's panels make their energy month to month, most of it in the summer, and they kind of sleep in the winter. And that is the calculation for the XL credit and the SunShare charge. So you can see that that bill credit and SunShare charge always equaling each other is at their peak in the summer months and low point in the winter months. And how do you leave the program? So a few ways. If you no longer have an XL bill in your name, you're no longer eligible. That could mean that you move outside of XL's electricity territory, or for any other reason you're not on an XL bill. Then you're just done. You're not eligible. But if you move inside XL's territory, you get to take it with you. It's portable solar, which is kind of neat. Now, if for some reason you decided you didn't want to do it anymore, call up customer care, let them know. They'll replace you with whoever's at the top of the wait list. So it's pretty nice that it's super flexible. It doesn't tie you to anything, doesn't cost you anything extra. We make it as flexible as we can. And this is good for anyone who can't put solar on their own roof. A renter, someone with a shady roof, someone who's maxed out their roof, can't afford solar on their roof, or just for whatever reason doesn't want to do it. It's a really nice tool. Now, a couple of questions I often get asked. I have solar on my roof already. Doesn't supply all of my needs. Can I do community solar as well? Yes, I do that a lot for folks. So say you supply 70% of what you need with your own PV system, you can subscribe to community solar on top of that to bring you up to 100%. And in fact, in Colorado, you can subscribe for up to 200% of the electricity you use yearly. So if you wanted to, especially if you have gas heat in your house, you could subscribe for up to 200% of your electricity use. And because XL applies it to your gas bill, you still won't be paying anything extra for this product. And then finally, a lot of people say to me, okay, what's the catch? Too good to be true. But the fact is, everyone's getting what they need here. XL is getting electricity. We're giving it to them. Now they don't have to make that, but they have to pay for it, right? And they get to set the rate they're paying for that electricity at, the bill credit rate. So they are paying the subscriber, and the subscriber's handing that money over to SunShare. So XL's getting energy, SunShare's getting money from each and every subscriber in the monthly bill, as well as tax credits. Everyone who ties to the grid, an individual or a company, gets federal tax credits. And by the way, XL gets the RECs in Colorado, if anyone was wondering. And then finally, the subscriber, they get to be part of the renewable energy revolution, right? They get to offset their fossil fuel electricity for no extra cost. So it's a win-win all the way around and just a really neat tool that we have available for us. So if you have any questions, we're probably going to hold those to the end, I think is how Martin wanted to do that, because this is primarily about Salina's talk today. So thank you so much for your time.
And I am jealous of all of you who have an XL bill. I don't have one, so I can't participate in this program. So I wish that I could, and I'm actually part of helping Colorado market as well. I work primarily in New Mexico and the tribal market for SunShare, but my goal would be to open up some other options for all of us who don't have an XL bill in Colorado. So really the purpose of my talk, where I really wanted to start, was really thinking about energy transition, right? I have transitioned my own career from fossil fuels all the way over to renewable energy. And so I have personal experience. I've been kind of watching how people are doing it and where we're going, what we're doing. And I want to remind folks that this is not the first energy transition that we have been through, right? There have been other energy sources throughout our history. And so this is not the first time. There's ways for us to learn from history. There's ways to do this energy transition and do it well and do it quickly, because I feel the pressure of time. I don't know how everyone else feels in the room, but there is definitely a pressure of we need to go quickly. I think that the energy transition happens anytime there's a collision of kind of these three elements. When there's an economic incentive, so for example, during the Civil War, we used to use kind of a camphene oil, but then the price of alcohol, taxes on alcohol went up. And so the cost of the fuel went way up. So then everybody kind of switched over to whale oil. And then we almost killed all the whales. And then the first well was drilled in Pennsylvania for natural gas. So we said, okay, why don't we try this? And now we're seeing that, oh, the carbon in the atmosphere is not working out so well for us. So now we need to think about other energy structures. So that economic incentive, and even you see the IRA has been a huge boom in getting renewable energy off the ground and getting projects off the ground. I think that ties into some of the superior technology. When we have better technology, we should be using it. We should be deploying that technology. And then, of course, environmental impact. I think, of course, when we are experiencing all of the climate change that we have, and we are experiencing, there's going to be migrants for the climate crisis. There's going to be a lot of choices we're going to need to make about our housing, about our food, and this is going to be a lifetime effort. And I have two kids who are teenagers, and they were part of the reason I switched from fossil fuels over to renewable. But they're like, "What are you adults doing? Why aren't you helping? Help us do this thing." And we have a responsibility to build for the next 7 generations. That's how Indigenous people think. We, heal everything for the last 7 generations. Bad stuff stops with me, and we build for the future 7 generations. And we've got to really start thinking that way. As I mentioned, I started in oil and gas, and so my very first job was at Thumbs Islands. This is Texaco Humble Union Mobile Shell is what Thumbs stands for. And in the 1920s, there was a big kind of oil boom in Long Beach. And so the main strip of Long Beach here on this left picture on the upper left was really just covered in rigs. Like all of California was just rigs everywhere. And then what they found out is as they continued to extract oil out of the ground, Long Beach started to sink. And over a period of about 25 years, they realized, oh my gosh, it's going to be about 20 foot. So you can see an example of the dog looking up at the fire hydrant, right? Because the ground had sunk that much. And it feels like mind-blowing, right? But this is what economic impact looks like when it comes to energy development. And so there was a huge movement to gather probably 400 oil companies, the city, the state. It took a massive amount of work to come together to try and mitigate this problem. And what they did first was shut down the oil production. And this was in the 1950s, about 1958. And then they went and designed these man-made islands. They dredged up the seafloor. They brought out boulders from Catalina Island. They hired Disney architects to make it beautiful. We still had a budget for palm trees, for example, when I worked there. And so this was people would take pictures in front of the oil islands, their wedding pictures, because they were so beautiful. We would have people call and be like, your condominium is moving around out there because the drilling rig was covered to look like an apartment building and then ran on railroad tracks on the island. And this was state of the art in the 1960s that this was built. And this was revolutionary for how we developed oil and gas versus the number of rigs that we had. So Long Beach was this example where you brought together all of the stakeholders that energy impacted, the community, and you made sure that you thought about the partnership with the city and the state, and that you really thought about how to tie innovation into that. So the city and the state have a stake in this. They have made many millions of dollars that help fund a lot of things in any community. They now, as they transition, there are plans to shut these islands down. We've all talked about turning them into a golf course. We had a lot of planning go on when I was there. So it's something that, it can be done, is what I think, is really what this taught me. And then I moved out after a decade of working in this area and this wonderful place and this innovation, and this is what I thought the entire oil industry was like. Oh no, that's not what it was like. moved back home here to Colorado, and really as I started kind of stepping through my career, I worked with the Ute tribe with a company. I worked here locally in Weld County. I worked in Kansas. I worked in Wyoming and North Dakota. And really it just came down to like everything became about profit and dollars only and whatever the Wall Street analysts wanted. And it just was no longer about the community or energy development or affordable, reliable, abundant energy. And so, then I kind of went through and did my own trauma-informed therapy and a lot of work for my childhood development trauma. And part of that is reconnecting to my own culture, reconnecting to my own story, my own history, and what happened and how that is also part of my story and energy. And so, as you know, there's, a movie out. And this movie is really the movie that talks about the oil field and how the FBI came about. And the book over here on the left, A Pipe for February, is the Osage story. It is a story told from their point of view, and it was actually part of the research that went into the book for Killers of the Flower Moon and into the movie. And so this story really talks about that violent history of the oil and gas industry, the exploitation, the extraction, the harm to communities, all in the name of profit. And I think for me, this was kind of that nail in the coffin that I couldn't keep doing it. And so that idea of taking my experience where I could see partnership and profit sharing and community development happen in energy development, juxtaposed with the exploitation and extraction, I really wanted to focus on energy sovereignty for tribes. So, there's a long history in our US, and without recognizing and reconciling our history, we're not going to be able to build something better, right? I don't want renewable energy to follow the same path of exploitation and extraction of tribal communities, or any community for that matter. And so community solar to me is the same as energy sovereignty because it gives people choice. It gives people, communities have a right to choose what their energy is and what they want. And we see that play out here in Colorado, right? Weld County is going to be different than Boulder. And so we want people to be able to make their decisions about where their electricity comes from, where it's energy, where it's generated, where it's distributed. And it really needs to match kind of their life and their culture, their social, economic, ecological circumstances. And so especially with tribes, right, they're an entire government themselves. They're sovereign nations. Whether the treaties are honored by the US government or not, they are still sovereign nations. And they have the right to make choices about their energy. And community solar is one of those solutions where they can kind of use their land and then think about exporting that energy and doing the same thing, getting subscribers to then have those dollars flow back into their community. And so the dollars, the resourcing of a community is what is really needed when we think about tribal energy sovereignty. Energy sovereignty, there's some guiding principles, and you may not be able to read all of these, but I'm going to talk through them, and I'm going to have some slides tied to them as well. But the number one piece of energy sovereignty is accessibility. So this is allowing that clean energy is for everyone. Everyone deserves affordable energy, and we should be reducing barriers to access to that affordable energy. The IRA legislation can do that, incentives can do that. The way we think about energy solutions can do that, but that's really the guiding principle, the number one thing. The number two and kind of three are more collaboration and transparency, and I think those speak for themselves. But what does that really mean in tribal communities? And I'll talk through that in a little more detail. But the goal is to be solution-oriented and to work together. We really need to share our knowledge, right? There's an imbalance of knowledge right now, and we need to balance that knowledge between communities and those of us who are energy professionals. The next kind of piece is really around economic development. I talked about resources, right? When a group of people are moved from their home, when they're moved from riverlands to the plains, or when they're moved to places where they don't have food or they don't have water, like Native Americans were, those resources were extracted altogether from those groups. And they've had to rebuild. I talk about in Native communities, we're living in the post-apocalyptic world. The apocalypse already happened for our community. So we're building, we want you to come join us and build with us. And so that's the piece where, thinking about economic development, these communities have to build hospitals, they have to build education and schools, they have to develop internet, they have to develop electricity. It is just like the state of Colorado. Like, could you imagine living in this state and not having schools or not having hospitals, right? So it takes money and resources to make that happen. And then a big core of being Indigenous and being Native is really around the resiliency, the sustainability, the kind of that Mother Earth, that balance between the system we live in, the world we live in, and who we are, and that environmental stewardship. And so I'll talk a little more about that. And then the final kind of cornerstone is community, and that really overlays everything in tribal communities. So as I mentioned, resources are a major thing to get into the community. And so it really starts with kind of first knowledge sharing. So like SunShare, we have an education forum coming up next Friday down in New Mexico for the Pueblos. And we really are sharing openly the information. We talk about sharing, how can we share our financial models? How can we walk them through how the dollars move in this energy program? How can we walk them through how to site something, how to work with the utility, how to get through the interconnection queue? All of those parts and pieces. And so we sponsor those education forums, and we show up and we share our knowledge at those forums. SunShare has also committed dollars, and this is kind of a no strings attached. We believe that communities can really take those dollars and do what they need to do with them. So it's not our job to tell them what to do with the dollars or require a bunch of grant reporting or anything like that. Allow them to kind of run as they need. So we really thought of in our program in New Mexico, as part of our commitment to building solar gardens there, which we're actively building 6 of them there, we donated $6 million to Navajo Technical University, and that's for education. They can use those dollars however they want. But the idea is workforce development when it comes to renewable energy career development. We also donated $1.2 million to the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. And that's because violence is an ongoing issue in Native communities because of the under-resourcing. And so you just have layers upon layers. And Native communities aren't the only ones that deal with all these kind of challenges. But that we thought, if you can't do, it's kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? If you don't have your basic needs met, how can you think beyond that? And so we want to be able to stop and give some dollars and resources to the community. We also gave some funding to a local nonprofit, Sovereign Energy, so that they could get up and running and really do some in-depth work and go beyond community solar for the Pueblos. We also fund a scholarship through them, and so they can choose if they want to hire a student, or it kind of helps pass the baton and build more capacity in the community. So one of the first pieces is to really think about, what does the community need and how can I get it to them with no strings attached? I think that this gives them that initial start to then be able to move into the very hard work of development, which is what I do a lot of. So when it comes to developing on tribal lands, it's critically important to think of it as co-development. It is not walking in and saying, I think this is what is best for you. I think you should do this. It's I have this idea and I have this skill set and I want to share. Tell me about what your challenges are. Tell me about how I can help. And everything from the planning and engineering, that goes in on the early stages, to the regulatory and permitting, which can be a lot of even helping small towns figure out how to write this. It's very similar in tribal communities, right? You're kind of writing as you go, or building the plane while it's sitting on the runway. Offtake and ownership, right? This is where power purchase agreements come in. And community solar, it's structured in one way. Other types of renewable energy could be done differently, but getting those contracts in place. And this is that core part of thinking about ownership. There's different structures you can do in tribal communities depending on the tribe's preference for ownership and equity in the projects, or access to the DOE loans program office, or how you want to write the legal agreements. Some tribes are still under the BIA, so the BIA has to approve everything they do, which is about an 18-month process to get through that. So there's lots of different things to kind of take into account. The IRA has really tried to open a lot of this up. So there's specific incentives and benefits for projects that are built on tribal lands and benefit tribal communities. So if you can share those profits, you can access those tax credits and pass them through. The direct pay provisions, we were really hoping to see this as a way to allow the tribal communities to get dollars directly from Treasury and be able to be part and parcel inside of these projects. So the idea was that they would almost act as a tax equity partner in projects because they could access funds through the DOE or through the Treasury. Unfortunately, the guidance came out a couple weeks ago for the direct pay from the IRS, and they've basically made it impossible for it to even be used. So there's some work going on kind of on the back end to really help communicate and try and get the IRS to change their position, but I don't have a lot of hope, unfortunately. A lot of people, when they think of energy development on tribal communities, a lot of folks will just jump right to workforce development. How can we help them, give them jobs to construct? And this happens really in any community. We talk about how we can just bring in people who construct. But there's a lot of work that happens before you get to construction. And so it really is a co-development, and construction is only one piece of that full development. Operations and maintenance is another piece where it can be an ongoing thing, right? They live on the land, they live near. That's what community solar is so beneficial for them. And so it really allows them to be integrated with their energy and be a part of that energy solution from an energy development perspective, as long as the companies showing up are doing it well and doing co-development. In tribal communities, the overall way to think about it is it's all one system. It is not a food industry, it is not an energy industry, it is not a water, it is, we live on one planet and one system, and we are part of that system. And so our water and our food and our energy are connected. And if we don't start accepting that and acting as though those things are connected, we're really going to have many more problems in the future. And all of those things influence our culture too, right? Like the way we live our lives is influenced by how much water we have, and what type of food we eat, and what type of energy we have. And so we really need to start thinking in terms of all these parts and pieces. I'm working on a project in the state of Minnesota with the Chippewa tribe and the Ojibwe bands. And so that project is this idea that you got to figure out how to decarbonize steel and decarbonize cement and think about the fuel for the shipping industry and the fuel for the airline industry and all of these parts and pieces. It's a very complex problem to solve. It's not just about generating electricity. And so all of these pieces, this whole system has to work together. We have to be solving all of these problems. And I agree, it's really challenging. One of the really wonderful pieces that I love about community solar is this new kind of technology that's starting to happen with agrivoltaics. If you have not been to Jack's Solar Garden, you need to go to Jack's Solar Garden. They offer tours. They're just outside of Boulder, so not very far away. And this is the very first kind of where you can see a dream come to life in terms of how we think about the nexus of food, water, and energy. At Jack's Solar Garden, they have a whole, they support all the bee population, so you can walk around the property. There's raspberries all around, and you eat raspberries as you walk around in the solar garden. They hold dinners out there and concerts out there. They have yoga, they have painting, they have artists who come in and do things. They work with a lot of research partners. So one of the things they did was, how do cows like solar gardens? Do they do okay? You know, something like 70% of the land in the U.S. is used for rangeland. And there's a balance of, you know, how we think about our livestock and what we use it for and our food sources. I was at an NREL thing and on a panel and there was someone talking about cows and how they feed about 90 million people. So if you get rid of cows, you get rid of food. And that's not going to work either. So there's this whole balance of figuring it all out. So if you can really start to combine these resources together, there are really some creative solutions. Sunshare specifically, we do this work. We have actually Sunshare honey that we get. So I think we actually have too much honey and we're always trying to give it away. I should have brought some tonight. And then we also we use sheep grazers instead of machinery to keep the vegetation low at our gardens. And then we are doing a really cool project in Minnesota where it's a farm-to-table project. And so we actually have an apple orchard, and they're growing all kinds of food, and then that food is going to be used at the restaurant local by. At Jack's Solar Garden, they have farmers who come in really getting access to land as a smaller farmer is really critical. And so what they do is they bring farmers in, do some research, and then they donate food to food banks. So that's another way to kind of start connecting all the parts and pieces. Agrivoltaics is a fairly new science. It is not well developed yet. We're still figuring it out. Every garden in New Mexico will have agrivoltaics on it. We have committed to that. And as you can imagine, in a desert, it's challenging. So I am trying to turn New Mexico green, both with energy and with land. So with all of this, you know, when we think about that whole system, and I started the whole talk around this is what our grid looks like. We have these centralized power plants. Energy development, energy services have always been organized as a consumer good. You just got to pay for it, right? And you pay someone else money, and you pay a monopoly money. And it's not a human right. And I'm a firm believer that energy is a basic human right, just like food, just like water, just like shelter. And so as we start to transition what our grid looks like and what our energy sources look like and how that's integrated with everything else that we do, it will likely become more community focused, more customer centric. And so that is necessary for that equitable access. You know, it's just vital for all of our well-being. It isn't something that we can avoid. This is all part of our work. So my call to action, our duty as energy professionals. That's how I like to view us. There's many of us work in various ways in energy. As energy professionals, I want us to be lighthouse leaders. I want us to show up and say, this is what's possible, and let us dream, and let us imagine, and let us solve the hardest problems out there. And it can really begin with that community-centric, putting community first when we think about partnership and profit sharing. Use examples, whether it's from the oil industry where they did it well, or whether it's from the tribal communities where they do that on a regular basis. And that's an important part of inclusivity. When we talk about inviting voices at the table and having those diverse voices, that inclusion of those voices also requires us to center other voices. So it isn't enough to have someone in the room. It has to be that their voice and their perspective is centered. And that's something that I think we're all still learning how to do. I know I experienced that. I challenge my own company to center my perspective over a white perspective, and that is a challenge to go through, but it is an honest conversation that we have to have. And then education and knowledge sharing. I'm passionate about education. Education really saved my life, changed the direction that I was heading. I'm a first-generation high school and college graduate. I'm a firm believer in sharing my knowledge and really helping people understand energy in a more intuitive way. I think we can learn from our history. We can do energy development better, and we need to build from today. We can't just wipe everything out and start over. It takes too long. We just got to build from today. And then, like I said, integrate systems. You really got to be action-oriented. We can't just sit around and talk about it all the time. We're out of time. We've got to take action in any way possible on every front. And be values driven. Remember why we're doing it and why we're here and that we're all one system and it's all connected. And be relationship focused, right? We're not alone in this. We work as a team, we work as a group of people. The work is hard and it takes a lot of personal energy to show up and do it, but it makes it easier when I get to come to groups like this and have these conversations. So in Indigenous communities, what we do after we have these kind of talks is everybody gets a chance with a microphone. We call them talking circles. So you can say your own thoughts. If you have thoughts on my slides, you can ask questions, you can whatever you need to do. So I'm going to open it up for questions and comments. I think there's a microphone somewhere.
So I'm working as an accountant for a renewable energy company. They're based out of California. And I have two questions. So on your slides, you working with tribal communities, how you ensure the transparency of funds from the beginning to the end when you start building project, when you finish the project, like financially wise, how you make sure the money actually go towards the building solar panels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so transparency, is critical, obviously, and the way that I ensure it when I'm working in those tribal communities, not just from a dollar accounting finance side, but as from a project planning and engineering and decision-making side too, is really at every step of the way we are having meetings with tribal leaders. So tribal governments can be set up in a variety of different ways. Each community is going to have its own structure. Most of them, the U.S. government, it was actually modeled off of indigenous governments. So there's usually an executive branch, usually a legislative branch, and usually a judicial branch. They often have a governor or a chairperson, and then they have a council, and they vote. Sometimes it's every year they're voting for these people, sometimes it's every 2 years, sometimes it's every 4 years, sometimes it's staggered. So one of the things that's really important to do with transparency is to make sure that you also have some kind of committee or group of people that kind of stays constant as administrations change out. That's no different than state governments or U.S. governments, right? And so we go and talk to them about what we're thinking about, and then we do a proposal, and they ask us a bunch of questions, and then I go and do some work, and then I come back and say, here's my work, and here's what I'm thinking and why I'm thinking it, and then they go and think, and they come back and they're like, we like A, B, and C. And so then I go and do all the details on A, B, and C, and then I show them, and we're giving them the maps to it, we're giving them the spreadsheets to it. A lot of times they have an entire administration that has legal, that has accounting, that has finance. So they have all of those groups of people in most of the communities to be able to vet that sort of data. So it's really not much different than, say, like a JV partner where, if they have equity in that project, you're going to be giving them everything. Non-op is a way that in oil and gas, that's how it's talked about. People who are not operating those projects but still get financial benefit. There's a set of transparency that happens usually in the legal agreements on what's required. But a lot of it is just ongoing communication and regular interaction. You're working together as a team is really what it looks like.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation. I'm impressed with the work that you're doing. You mentioned the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. I have some basic knowledge of Indian issues. Why are sovereign tribes still under the thumb of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and what would it take for them to kick them out and say, thank you very much, we don't need you anymore?
Yeah, amen. So the BIA was potentially, but there have been some changes in legislation that have improved the situation. So the BIA it's a very paternalistic setup, the way the U.S. government was like, you savages, which is, you guys don't use that word. It's a terrible word, but are not educated enough to do this yourselves. So we have to do it for you. That's effectively what the BIA was. And many indigenous communities feel like people who go to work for the BIA are considered turncoat. That's almost the view that it's held. Since probably the 70s or so, there have been a lot of Indigenous people who have moved into the BIA to really center Indigenous perspectives. Deb Haaland now is the Secretary of Interior who oversees the BIA, so putting an Indigenous person in charge of the BIA is maybe the first step, right? So that all of those things really helped. In 2019, there was also some additional legislation that happened that allows tribes to apply for basically special dispensation so that they can lease their own land. That's really what the BIA prevents them from doing, is setting their own terms for leasing, their own terms for ecological surveys. And it's considered federal land is what it's viewed as, even though it's sovereign land, right? So it is a challenge, it's a real thorn, but it is the world we live in, it is the system we have, and we do have to deal with it. And to remove it completely would be a huge fight against the US government, and tribes are not always successful in that, and certainly not with the current Supreme Court. So I think that those elements would be really challenging. So I think these small changes that we keep doing to improve it along the way is really the best that we can do. The direct pay provision in the IRA, fighting for that to work the way it was originally intended would be really important. And then if every tribe, if we could get resources to all of the tribal nations so that they can do the work to apply for this special dispensation, there's several parts and pieces to go through. It's some bureaucratic process like it always is. And so that would be incredibly helpful. And then that, if they keep pulling back their sovereignty as much as they can in any place that they can. But yeah, I wish I could just scratch it out and be done with it. Yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'm so excited to hear that this is going on. And it sounds like a lot of it happened because of the IRA, but I'm curious to know, having grown up in New Mexico, who are you working with, because there are large reservations like the Navajo, and then there are, all the Pueblos along the Rio Grande. And then as part of that, are you also collaborating with Native folks in Colorado? Thanks.
Yeah, so my job at Sunshare, really, the COO, Karina Cumpy, is passionate about this. This was something she felt like tribal communities and community solar just belong together. And she really wanted to start this, and she and I had done some work together on another project with my company, and I really wanted to get going in this. And so at Sunshare, certainly the IRA really created the incentive, the financial incentive to finally take action on a dream that Karina had. And I'm part of that action plan. In New Mexico, you're right, there are 19 Pueblo nations in New Mexico. They don't really work in concert together, so they really work individually as individual nations. They have different rules, different leaders. We work with several of them, so I'm under confidentiality agreement, so I can't publicly state who we're working with, but a number of the Pueblos. There are also the Apache and the Navajo Nation. The Apache just pulled out of the utility. Sovereign nations, tribal communities can use eminent domain to capture the infrastructure from really anyone. And so that allowed them to be able to have their own utility, which gives them much more freedom to be able to do as they please in their community. So the Jicarilla Apache Nation did that here recently. The Navajo Nation has a lot of different groups, chapters is what they're called, that kind of roll up to the higher level. And they're a huge nation. One of the biggest challenges in the Navajo Nation is there's just no grid. They maybe have some of the transmission lines, right? They have right-of-ways where they make pennies on the dollar for those right-of-ways, but they don't actually have access to that electricity. And that's one of the biggest challenges we need to figure out how to electrify the Navajo Nation. Community solar specifically is challenging challenge because we need the grid there to be able to put it into the grid. That's the way community solar works. But what I am doing is working with some of their groups to help them design and plan. They like to think of solar corrals is the way they call it. And so they want to bring a number of families together and be able to build kind of a solar garden that then supports all of those families so that they don't have to pay individually. So a similar idea to community solar. So I'm passing on the knowledge and helping with development in that way. And yes, my goal is to open up the Colorado tribal market too. You know, the Southern Ute tribe down near Durango is one of the richest tribes because of oil and gas. But they have been doing a lot of work in thinking about their energy, and they now, their casino runs on geothermal and solar energy now. So I think that would be a really wonderful place to talk about community solar, but it's not really my job to go in and say, hey, you should do this, right? And so a lot of it is just relationship building and saying, hey, I'm here, my plate is definitely full with the 19 Pueblos, I will need to hire more people to do this work, but I am talking with the Chippewa tribe in Minnesota, and then the Seneca Nation in New York. And that's really, it's more relationship driven right now. It isn't like, I don't know of community solar. I don't know enough about if they would even want that or need that. But I certainly want to provide my energy expertise in any way that I can.
Yeah, fantastic work that you all are doing. And you already answered a number of my questions about Navajo, but I am curious, how your working relationship has been with NTUA, with the chapter. I know with the nation, they have been trying to get an energy office set up. I don't know if they've, how far they are on that.
Yeah.
They started that before COVID, and then COVID hit. But I'm curious about your long-term vision for engagement, not just in New Mexico, but Arizona, where that's where the bulk of Navajo Nation is, and the Hopi tribe.
Yep.
And they have some unique issues with access to to the grid, and it seems like this model would really be appropriate for them. So, could you talk a little bit about kind of your vision for engaging more tribes in the Southwest?
Yeah, if it were up to me, if I had kind of a magic wand that I could wave, I would really want all tribes to use eminent domain and take the infrastructure away from the investor-owned utilities, because they're the worst to work with. It's challenging, right, to get through interconnection queues and figure out the bureaucracy and the process and all the rate. There's a lot of regulations that go into that, and I think there would be a lot of side effects if I were to wave that magic wand. And so I do think that what needs to happen is this step-by-step progressing as we build out. We need to understand how this will work for the Pueblos, right? There hasn't been community solar gardens built on any native tribe, or with any native tribe, on any tribal lands. And so solar is being built for sure, but a lot of it is grant funded. And so one of the critical things that I think community solar offers is that benefit of those dollars flowing back to the community. And so that ownership of the gardens, the ownership of the infrastructure, and the dollars flowing in, that's what's really needed. So from a long-term vision, I would really like to go through, every tribal nation. There's a lot, right? There's like 140 in California alone. And so I'm just one person, and I'm just one person at one company doing work for one group. And so it's going to take a lot more people to work on this, and a lot more knowledge to be shared. I really think about it as capacity building. That's kind of step one. We got to build capacity, we got to share knowledge, we got to get resources, we got to get dollars moving, and then we got to really set up those energy offices or those utility commissions or whatever that kind of group would look like, to have a focus work group on it. And if that happened, I think that's where we could really then start to open everything up. There's another group, the Tribal Clean Energy Alliance, I think is what they're called. They're out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And what they do is vet companies who are trustworthy to work with tribes, right? Not every company works like Sunshare. Not every company has the ethos. Not every person has that. And we could just head down a really terrible path if we're not careful. So I think getting more companies vetted and building that capacity, those are the two pieces that would make this move quite a bit faster. The other piece is the legislation. Community solar requires usually legislation put in place at the state level. There's nothing in the national that allows us to do this. And so Arizona doesn't have community solar, and it would require the people of Arizona to fight for that legislation and make that happen. The Pueblos were instrumental in passing the Community Solar Act in New Mexico, and one of the things they did really well was fight for their sovereignty and retained their sovereignty in New Mexico when it came to, what they were allowed to do or not allowed to do. They're basically allowed to do what they choose to do, and they retained that in the Community Solar Act because they were an instrumental part of that. So I think making sure that there's the engagement from a legislative point of view would be really important for the communities, have their voice in the room and centered.
Yeah, this might be a good point to pitch a new institute at your alma mater, the Colorado School of Mines. They just created a Native American mining and energy sovereignty initiative.
Yes.
And they're kicking it off with a conference at the Southern Ute Casino.
Yep.
In about a month at I believe it's the 20th and 21st of May. Mm-hmm. And if anybody in the audience would like, has a professional interest in engaging there, I recommend you talk to the people at the Payne Institute at the Colorado School of Mines, because that, I believe, is really part of the capacity building that you were talking about. And we had more questions in the back, so.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing the work that you're doing and the work as well. I actually had two questions. One is about, we need to scale the solar farms, right? We need to build a ton of them. So this is a great idea. Seems like it will, benefit the communities as well as, help us transition. So I'm curious in terms of, have you had failure with, when you went with this proposal? Was there any resistance that, or to building these farms when you went to tribes with that? Or is it more just a logistics issue to get it built out and vetted? So that's one question. Mm-hmm. And the other is about, is Sunshare considering pairing energy storage along with the panels to kind of even out the intermittency?
Yeah, so a couple of things on that front. The pairing energy storage, I think that's a necessary part, right? You have this kind of cyclical nature that solar has, and at the same time, when we think about batteries and the options for that, it takes the rare earth minerals, the mining, there's a side effect to that too. And so one of the things that we've done is invested in a startup company in New Mexico that works on thermal storage. And so the idea is that you can actually use the earth as your battery and store the energy as heat and then convert it back to power. So we're helping that research, and certainly as some of the solutions right now, we don't put batteries on them. Part of it is an economic decision, but that is not ruled out. That is part of our planning and development. So with tribal communities, it just is a very long lead time, a long relationship building. You usually are working with trust brokers in the community. So if you, as a developer, if you walk into a tribal community and be like, I want to talk to you about this thing, they're going to be like, you are now blacklisted. Don't do that. You have to find the trust brokers, the people who are vetting for the tribal leadership, and we work with, I mentioned sovereign energy. That was part of our funding, right? We wanted to be able to protect the Pueblos. We wanted them to be able to protect themselves, and to do that, allowing them to stand up an organization that can then manage that for them is very, very helpful. So we really have been working in the New Mexico market since 2017 and won projects in 2022. So this is a very long period of time that we're talking about. And so by the time I'm sitting in front of governors or I'm sitting in front of the council doing the proposal, they're very engaged and excited. Also, this is part of what their administration is focused on, is thinking about resiliency in their community and energy solutions in their communities. So no, I haven't had that pushback, but there are some communities who have developer fatigue. They're like, please do not give me another proposal. I do not want to talk to anybody else. There are others that have had, tragedies, or they have other focus in their communities and they just can't get to it, or are not ready for it. So, and that's okay. I think you just kind of build at the pace that works. But there is a need for renewable energy solutions in general in tribal communities. And community solar isn't the only solution, and it won't work for every tribe. So I think it's important to think about, understand. A lot of them may have energy plans or master development plans that they have thought about this. Some don't. So it kind of depends on the focus of that particular leadership and that particular tribe. But so far, it's been very welcomed, the need for renewable energy. In fact, in Canada, they just put out a just transition guide. An Indigenous woman went and got her PhD and wrote the Just Transition Guide. And she really put it out with the intent that Indigenous people can lead themselves and lead the way in the renewable energy transition. And so that guide is a really great resource, and I highly recommend checking it out. Reach out to me if you would like a link to that.
My question, after a little context, is there any thought yet about the integration of time of day billing into this? And I go back to the presentation where you showed how simply the credits come and the stuff flows. And it had no recognition that a kilowatt hour at one time of day is different in value from a kilowatt hour at another time of day. And Excel is winning on that because the solar is produced at a high time and given a credit equal to a low time overall. But it would, coming back to this last conversation, have to do with potential arbitrage, if there was time of day, that the tribe could, with storage, get an arbitrage advantage. So is there any thought about time of day?
Right now, there isn't, that it adds kind of another level of complexity when you think about the commercial aspect of putting that together. I think there's a group called Guzman Energy who does this same type of work. They do a lot of energy balancing work and on behalf of tri-states, and it's an arbitrage type of way of working. And so I do think there's that opportunity. I know Guzman has been working with the Hickory Apache tribe in that same kind of way of how much power can be generated and at what time of day, and then how are you selling it back into the market. So I do think there's that opportunity, and I think we have models for that to be able to do that. Has it been done, and has it been done on community solar? No, not yet. But yeah, I wouldn't mind getting, premium rates to, yeah, wouldn't that be great? So yeah, time of day, and then also the benefit of storage, right? There's firm power is very different than a cyclical variable power.
Hi again.
Hello.
I have two questions in one. So question number one, the financing for those projects, are they coming from government grants for the tribes, for the tribe communities? Are they coming from oil and gas company grants or from the casinos that belong to the local tribe? And my second question, on the previous presentation, you had this credit flow from SunShare to Excel invoice, and my question is, Excel owns SunShare, 100% of it or part of it, or SunShare just has a power purchase agreement where they sell all the electricity to Excel and that's pretty much it?
Yeah, so no, we're actually Excel's competitor. They are not big fans of us because we actually take some of their profit away. And the idea is that this gives people choice, allows to put clean energy into the grid. Excel is required to take our energy per the legislation. It's a policy driven, and then though the bill credit is given to the consumers. And so we can negotiate with consumers for discounts to be able to give benefits, whatever that might look like. So that's something that is kind of a separate sort of how it all works from an agreement or legal agreements, and how the dollars flow is driven by policy and then our subscribers. So really we think of our customers at SunShare as our subscribers, and that we are kind of an advocate for them with Excel. So if there's a confusion on their bill or they have issues, we have kind of direct line to Excel, and we'll often just solve those problems for them. As far as dollars go for tribal energy projects, most tribes really start out with grants, but that usually requires some capital funds, matching funds, that they usually don't have. And so it's very challenging for them to build a lot of projects right off the bat and have ownership. The DOE Loans Program Office has been instrumental in helping to move the needle on this, and that's giving them access to kind of gap loans, if you will, while you're trying to get everything in place and before the dollars start flowing from power purchase agreements or subscribers or whatever it might be. So as long as a tribe owns 51% equity in the project, they can access the dollars from the Loans Program Office. SunShare's model is a little bit different. We think that it's our job to take on that risk and that capital risk, and then we really try and flow those dollars through otherwise. So we think of it as a profit sharing or a royalty or a way to set up endowment funds that are continuous and allow resources to flow, with the option to flip ownership at some point if that is interest to the tribe. So right now at the capacity building stage, what we want to do is give knowledge and give information while we build their capacity on how to build gardens and how to run them and how to do subscriber management. And then we can talk about that ownership piece. You know, tax equity partners usually come in for the first 6 years or so, and then that ownership will flip on those special purpose entities is the way it's structured. And so that gets into a lot of details on clean energy financing, and I know enough to be dangerous and probably state a lot of wrong facts, but yeah, that is a challenge in tribal communities, is access to funds to get these projects off the ground. It does take a company like SunShare to say, hey, we'll do that, and think about a creative way otherwise.
I am a sustainable management student, and I currently live in southern New Mexico. And I'm really excited to see community solar moving into New Mexico, because I feel like those opportunities are very few and far between, especially with the large swaths of land between larger metropolitan areas. Everywhere is a commute, which I love, but as far as renewable energy, it's been a little difficult. And for my degree and hopeful subsequent internship, when I come to Colorado, I'm privy to all these amazing talks and conferences and experiences, and I'm trying to just soak it all in. But in New Mexico, it's been very difficult to really break into that space and to even get accurate information without going to a government facility. It's become very more difficult than I anticipated. I have family here, so I'm lucky to be able to spend time here. But for example, you mentioned, what was it, Jack's Solar Garden? Are there any resources or experiences or volunteer opportunities or literally anything related to renewable energy in New Mexico that you'd recommend for someone essentially wanting to be in your position?
Yeah.
To be honest.
Well, welcome aboard. I may be looking for interns, so talk to me. You know, I think that one of the pieces, the New Mexican people are wonderful and welcoming, and I get to travel there next week, and I love going there. There are days I think about moving away from home here in Colorado to live there because I enjoy it so much. And one of the parts that I'd like to do is be able to share that knowledge so that you do have access to these types of groups and creating those kinds of community to be able to do this work. So one, I can introduce you to several of the groups that I'm part of, that there is a lot of people working on this. There are these kinds of of talks. There are these kinds of gatherings. Several of the universities also are doing research. We're working with them on our agrivoltaics planning and research side of things. So that's another way. Sandia Labs is involved in the thermal energy storage work. So they're another kind of lab to focus on that. So New Mexico has its own kind of way of doing things for sure. But I definitely have heard over and over a lot of the people in the communities want more information and want more knowledge and want this kind of shared experience. I agree with you. Colorado is vibrant when it comes to community and knowledge sharing, energy, and really I've had that experience even as an entrepreneur here in Colorado. We have a just very community-oriented focus. And so, yeah, I'm happy to share resources, give you my card, and make connections for you.